to South Orange Library's Special Conversations program. Thank you all so much for coming. And I'm so happy to be here with Lynn Melnick, my dear friend who I met in Brooklyn Poet Moms group many years ago. When the kids were little. And ever since then I've been reading her poetry with great admiration, and now she's written this incredible memoir about herself and Dolly Parton, and we will talk a lot more about that, but I just want to tell you a little bit more about Lynn. She's the author of the memoir, I've Had to Think Up a Way to Survive, on Trauma, Persistence, and Dolly Parton, from University of Texas Press, just out. She's also the author of 3 great poetry collections, Refusenik, Landscape with Sex and Violence, and If I Should Say I Have Hope, all with Yes Yes Books. And she's also the co-editor of Please Excuse This Poem, 100 Poets for the Next Generation. Her work has appeared in APR, LA Review of Books, The New Republic, The New Yorker, The Paris Review, Poetry, A Public Space, and the anthology Not That Bad, Dispatches from Rape Culture. She's received grants from the Café Royal Cultural Society and the Hadassah Brandeis Institute. A former fellow at the New York Public Library's Coleman Center for Scholars and Writers, and she was previously on the executive board of VITA, Women in Literary Arts. She currently teaches poetry at Columbia University, Princeton University, and the 92Y, 92nd Y, right? 92nd Street Y. Born in Indianapolis, she grew up in Los Angeles and currently lives in Brooklyn. So thank you for coming all the way from Brooklyn. And were you going to start by reading a little bit?
Yeah, okay. I'll just read, let me see, just a few pages from the introduction.
Okay.
Hold on, let me see where I'm stopping. One second, you'd think I would have, all right, I'll figure out when to stop, So this is just it's from the very first chapter in the book, the introduction. There, I guess, if I'm going to issue a trigger warning, there is mention of rape and drug addiction, right in the first few pages. So I apologize if that's upsetting. The first time I remember hearing a Dolly Parton song start to finish was in the triage room of a hospital as I waited to be admitted to a drug rehabilitation program in West Los Angeles. I was 14. It was 1988, and Dolly and Kenny Rogers were singing 1983's Islands in the Stream across LA's Coast FM. I knew her voice, of course. It would have been hard to be anywhere near a radio or television in the last 50 years without getting to know Dolly's warm clarion soprano. But while I grew up on folk songs, basically country for blue states, music like Dolly's was often scorned in my parents' home and by my friends. My friends and I spent our time chasing down heavy metal bands on the Sunset Strip and would not have given Dolly the time of day. Many people of my generation, or at least those born outside the reign of country radio, first knew of Dolly as a straight-talking goofball on The Tonight Show, a set of giant tits, someone your grandma got a kick out of, someone who, my father would say with derision, was famous for being famous. Meanwhile, Dolly had been churning out hits for decades, possessed of a preternatural talent for writing and for singing authentic emotion into every song. Class and gender stereotypes could not and would not obscure her absolute genius or stop her from going where she wanted to go. I don't remember my parents in the moment they signed me into rehab, nor their probably weary faces younger than my own now, or much of what they said, only that the high cost of hospitalization was mentioned, and a joke made about hitting the annual insurance deductible in one night, March 3rd, a date I have marked every year in the 30-plus years since. As a parent of a teenager myself now, I assume there was significant pain involved, some bewilderment, but also perhaps some acknowledgement of this predictable next step in the falling apart sequence I'd been slowly enacting since I was raped by a teenage boy on overgrown 1970s carpeting before I turned 10 years old. Now halfway through 9th grade, I had already been expelled from school twice. Reckless behavior, followed by variously successful attempts to cover it up, was how I spent my free time while other kids studied or kissed or participated in team sports. I welcomed the stay at Glen Recovery Center. If I couldn't just be given an entirely new self, at least I wanted to make it clear to the world that the one I inhabited was wrecked. Being in rehab seemed like a rubber stamp to that effect. Less fond of cocaine and whiskey than of the exhilaration of forgetting, I craved the fresh environment. My parents filled out intake forms, and I was asked to create a list of people I approved to visit me. I sat with a lined sheet of paper on my lap, even though I knew I didn't want to see anyone. Outside, on Pico Boulevard, the Santa Ana winds blew through the tops of the palm trees visible from the windows on the triage room. I could hear the traffic flow east toward the tall, vacant buildings of downtown after dark, and west toward 20th Century Fox Studios, and eventually the Pacific Ocean. It was a relief to abandon whatever promise I'd held as a curious, shy girl in my brother's hand-me-down Sears dungarees and a cherished strawberry shortcake turtleneck, the outfit I'd worn to school on picture day a couple months before my body was violated on that deep pile of beige shag carpet. I'd worked hard since then to convince the outside world to join me in giving up on my potential, but Dolly's voice from the hospital ceiling speakers held a different kind of promise than that which I'd failed to meet. It was a release, a renewal, euphoric. When I heard Dolly's voice over the 4+ minutes of Islands in the Stream, I knew I needed to hear it again. Though it would be a few months before I purchased a greatest hits cassette tape from the bargain bin at a thrifty drugs, the multifaceted clarity of her voice hooked me instantly. I needed to feel that euphoria in my body again. I needed to believe in that bright precision and an artistry as unstoppable as Dolly herself. Resilience, longevity, outlast those who would doubt you. Just keep going. In my darkest moments, that's been the light she's shone on me. With over 100 singles, 50 albums, 160 million records sold, more than 400 television appearances, and scores of awards, Dolly has become even more of an icon in recent years, claimed and reclaimed by fans across a startling number of demographics and featured prominently and with due reverence everywhere, from memes and kitsch merchandise to awards shows and a Ken Burns PBS series. Dolly is an icon of feminine strength, and yet also an objectified caricature of womanhood. She's super savvy, while often playing the rattle brain. A deflection, perhaps, a feint of self-protection in a world where big talent and business acumen prove threatening when coming from a woman. She's a phenomenally accomplished artist who giggles it off as she keeps marching forward in 5-inch heels through the life she wants. She's an American dream.
Awesome. Thank you, Lynn. That's perfect introduction. So my first question is, and you've started to answer it there, but how did this book come to be? And why Dolly?
Well, why Dolly is because she brings me joy.
Yeah.
So the book came to be in 2018, which I talk about in the book. Was a very hard year for me for a lot of reasons. And I had one of those reasons was that I had been on the tour that I mentioned earlier, promoting a book called Landscape with Sex and Violence, which was a poetry book entirely about my history and experience with sexual violence. And so I was just burnt out. And I just didn't want to write about my own trauma anymore. And I really just wanted to write something that brought me joy. Yeah. So I wrote this tweet, which was, what if I spent all of 2019 writing about Dolly Parton? It was just like this thought. And then everybody reacted so positively to it. And then a friend who knew that the acquiring editor at New Texas Press was looking for a book for their American music series on Dolly Parton, and they're like, oh, you're planning to write this in prose? I was like, yeah, of course.
Just to make sure.
Yeah, like, I know how to write prose, no problem. And I was like, oh, sure, I can do this. And that's sort of how this, so I was like, it's one of these things that like never actually happens. Like it was just given to me.
Wow.
And so I had to figure out how to write about music, how to write prose, like long form. I'd written a few essays before. Like I didn't know what I was doing. Learned on the job. And then, of course, the irony is that much of the book is about my own trauma.
Right. And you didn't know that was.
No, I didn't know anything going into
it. You just
really.
were like, I'm going to write about Dolly. Yeah.
and what she brings up for me. And the other thing is, I could not have told you before I wrote the book why I felt such an affinity for Dolly Parton. I knew I did, and I knew that she was always there, like, in times of my life, but I didn't know what it was about her. And I actually had to get to almost the end of the book before I realized, like, duh. But I really hadn't thought about it before.
Wow.
And it was really just her sense of optimism.
Yeah.
And I'm like this very optimistic person. I just believe that, like, things are gonna get better and we can get through this and I can achieve what I want. And, like, despite everything, all the crap that you see in the book, and she's sort of the same way. But she's also someone who works really hard on her dreams. And I think those two things appealed to me. But I didn't realize that before I got to the last chapter.
Yeah, and her voice, like everything about her kind of emits that, like
Yeah.
positivity and
Yeah.
joy. And,
But also like a real
But very
focus.
complex,
Like
yeah.
one of my favorite quotes in the book is her manager who said, like, when you walk into a room with Dolly Parton, the one thing you know you won't be doing is taking advantage of Dolly. And I was like, that's who I want to be.
Yeah.
You know,
Wow.
she's like, she's got this whole get up and she's so kind and so polite, but like, don't fuck with her.
Don't mess with her, yes. Oh my gosh, wow. So I know you had written, you know, your poetry books focus a lot on sexual violence and very difficult topics, but was it, and personal too, but did you feel more exposed writing it in prose? Because poetry, you know,
Oh, yeah.
you can hide a little bit.
Yeah, I love that about
Yes,
poetry.
right?
Yeah, you just
Or
shift gears.
fiction, you know, you have some shielding, but if you're writing a memoir,
Yeah, and that was weird for me.
Yeah.
Also, like, just even learning how to write prose, my editor was like, you can't, like, just, like, drop the bomb and run away. You actually have to explain something of
It's
what
too bad.
happened. Yeah, it's too
Yeah,
bad.
it's really
Like,
too
poetry's
bad.
really great. Like, you're like, okay, I've gone deep enough, let's talk about something else.
Yeah.
So that was unusual. I got used to it. I think
Yeah.
one of the weirder things, and this is very recent, is that when, like, the first review that came out was a Publisher's Weekly review, and they gave it a
loved
very
it,
nice review.
yeah.
But they talk about me in it like I'm not me, like I'm a character. And they mention, like, you know, Melnick, and then in parentheses it says, who was raped as a child. And I was like, why are they, you can't talk about me like that.
Parentheses.
It's private.
God,
Like,
right.
it felt so strange to me. I was like, oh wait,
That's what I'm telling.
that's what
told
I've
that
done
story.
that to myself. This is, you know, and so that's very strange. That, like, the things that I have kept hidden for, you know, decades, right? Like hardly telling anyone,
Yeah.
are now like a plot point in my memoir. And that was a really weird thing, but also in a strange way, a really freeing thing.
Yeah.
Like, it's very new to me, like this feeling, because the book is so new, but I feel like, oh, I don't have to hold on to this shit anymore.
Right.
But it's Publisher's Weekly. So.
That's right. It's
their
their parenthesis.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's true. So what was your process for writing the book? Like, how did you deal with, I'm writing prose now. Did you have a different approach than you do with your poems?
Yes and no. Like, I think my editors at UTexas were very gently insistent that I stop veering away from things and like putting in things that were extraneous. So that was a real learning curve for me. And it was funny because I had two editors who were helping me, and one kept saying, you either gotta just dive into the muck or just make the book only about Dolly. And then my other editor was like, you have to make it more about music. And I was like, what?
Oh my God. So you did both?
So I did both.
Yeah.
I figured out how to do both. One thing, when I write poetry, and I don't know if you do this too, but like I have these things that are these separate ideas, and I just know that they connect to each other. You know, like I can connect, you know, like a diner to the end of the world, go.
Right, right.
I can do this. And that's what this book felt like, because it was like I can connect this Dolly song to this thing that happened to me, you know, as a kid. Like, let's see what happens. And every time. I had one chapter where the editor was like, that's kind of a stretch. So I fixed it on editing. But most of the time, like, things really did come together. And so that, you know, but writing prose, there's so many words.
There's so many words.
So many words.
It's a real problem.
It is a real problem. I'm sure you found this too, going from poetry to prose.
Yep.
There are just a lot of words, and it's just different.
Yeah.
It's
I thought I loved the arrangement of so each chapter is a song, a Dolly song. And like you said, and you connect it, right? And I thought that was really beautifully done in a smart way to like keep your brain organized too,
well,
right?
I'm extremely organized by nature, and I get stressed out when things aren't organized.
Yeah.
I'm that person. So I was like, I need to find a way to make this manageable or I'm going to be overwhelmed.
Yeah.
So I had this Dolly Parton playlist called Dolly, because I'm that clever. And I made it in 2012, and I was like, and I've been listening to it almost every day for now 10 years. And I was like, let me just follow the order of those songs, and I'll just write.
So that's what you did.
So that's what I did. I ended up having to change my playlist because I had to revise it and switch some chapters. So I changed the playlist.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Make sure it matched.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
And how did you write about music so well? And I know that you call on, you call on Paul, right?
Yeah.
One of her lifelines is here in
Yes.
the audience with us.
Yeah,
And
that's
she says in the book, she'll say, so I wrote my friend Paul and said, what is this doing here?
Yeah, that's really,
Yeah.
that's how I wrote about music.
You're welcome.
Yeah, it was like, I really had never written about, I played flute as a child, so I had some idea of what making music is like, but I had no experience with it.
Like the formal, the language around it.
Right, yeah, and so it was very helpful to be able to talk to Paul about that stuff, and really, like, I do just I called on my friends so much in writing this book, because that's what I do in life anyway.
I love that about it.
But I don't, there's a book called Unlikely Angel, The Songs of Dolly Parton by Lydia Hamsley, and she's a musicologist.
Okay.
And it is like an intense book. It was like reading a math textbook. It was so over my head.
Yeah.
And I tried to understand it, but there was a lot that I was just like, I don't understand the inner workings of how songs are created. I was Googling a lot of terms, but I felt like I had to get on top of it.
Right.
I over-prepared vastly for this book because I didn't want to mess it up in any way.
Yeah, it reads beautifully to me, because you have the instinctive connection to the music, obviously, and then I felt like you really did a great job.
It feels like such a gift now, because when I think about other songs and other music, I have this ability to unpack them in a way that I didn't before.
Right.
Which I love. I love
That's very cool.
having that resource.
Yeah. And I really loved the way you used your friends and your family.
Yeah.
Reading a memoir, you expect people to be kind of characters in the book, but really they were your collaborators too, and I just love that. And I was wondering if if that was conscious or it's kind of like showing the machinery of the book, which was really cool.
Yeah, I think, I signed the contract for this book, I can't remember, end of January, beginning of February 2020.
Okay.
So most of this book was written during the lockdown, at least the first couple drafts, and so I was home with my family a lot, so it was hard to, they become so primary to the book because they were just always there.
Right.
And I was always there.
Yep.
And then I've always relied on my friends so much the book is dedicated to my friends because that's how I'm here. And so I just sort of wanted to, they were included in the process, and so I just sort of included that process in the book. It felt like the realist way to do it.
Yeah.
Because they really, I did sort of constantly text them with questions about Dolly and music. And
that was one of my favorite chapters, and I forget which chapter it was, a later chapter which was about friendship. And I have a couple of quotes. You say in that chapter, "I wonder, have you ever loved a friend as much as a lover? I have. I don't know what I'd do without my friends." And it echoes this Dolly Parton quote, "I think friends can literally save your life." And I just thought it was that chapter and those words are such a beautiful take on friendship, one that we don't see enough, I feel like. We're always talking about romantic love, and that's way up here, and friendship is, but
I
love the focus that you put on.
It's interesting because I didn't, see it as that remarkable when I did it.
Yeah.
But so many people have commented to me, because to me, my friends have always been my loves and
Yeah.
my family and
Right.
like all of that. And so I didn't seem that unusual, but a lot of people have commented to me that
Yeah.
it sort of builds up. Because there's also a chapter in there, my husband's best friend passed away in 2018, and their love affair was a beautiful one, platonic, but just a love affair nonetheless, and losing her was like a really tragic thing, and I think that was also, and that had been very recent, and so that was sort of on my mind too as I wrote.
Yes.
Just like that kind of love. And then Dolly herself, her best friend Judy Ogle, who everyone wants to say she's has an affair with, but they're just, it is possible for two women to have a very deep friendship and then not have sex.
Right.
In case you're wondering.
Surprise.
I've done that. But like, it's just, you know, her friendship, I think, with Judy, besides her husband Carl, is the most lasting of her life. And
Right.
they're soulmates.
Yeah.
They're absolutely soulmates. And I
Yeah.
think we don't really talk about friendships like that
We
enough.
don't. And I just noticed today that the New York Times has put out this call for, they want people to write in and talk about their friendship, like their
That's
most
interesting.
important friendships. I thought, oh, maybe friendship is having a moment.
Things are
Between your
so
book-
bleak that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's talk about friends.
That's right.
One of the things that you do really well in the book is to look at that historical perception of Dolly Parton as this blonde, big-boobed bimbo, right? And you know, it masks this incredibly ambitious, gifted songwriter, musician that she is. And was it important for you to dig into that and kind of dismantle it while you were?
Yes, I mean, like I say in the first chapter of the book, like that was my perception of her growing up. I mean, I'd heard bits of her songs, but I hadn't really, you know, listened to a song start to finish when I was a kid. And she was that person on talk shows, or she was like a stereotype.
She laughs
like,
at herself.
The boobs were just always like the butt of the jokes, and you know, and we didn't watch a lot of TV when I was a kid, so I didn't see a whole lot of it. But that was just, you'd see her on tabloids at the supermarket, you know, having affairs or whatever they said she was doing, being abducted by aliens. And, you know, that was my impression of her. But I have watched, I think, almost every interview she's ever given at this point. And she, from the beginning, she'll use that persona, this like giggly kind of persona, and then do like really feminist things. Like there's this great moment in, she's on the Tonight Show, I think for the first time, maybe the second time, and she's talking about how she met her husband Carl, and they met outside the laundromat, and she was doing her wash the first day that she moved to Nashville, and she said, you know, if you meet a man at a laundromat, and Johnny Carson says, there's a good chance he's single, at the same time, this Dolly is saying, he'll do your wash for you. And they say it at exactly the same time. Yeah, and I was like, yeah, there you go. And there's like so much of that with Dolly, like she's so sneaky about it, and like people don't see it coming. And later, I think in that same interview, or maybe another one with him, Johnny Carson makes this joke about moonshine, and like as if to mock the hillbillies. And she turns it into a lesson on the economics of her region. Like she just gives him a quick schooling on how people survive because of moonshine. It's just very, and nobody would ever suspect. You know, like if Jane Fonda did the same thing, there would be like a boycott, but Dolly just,
She can
gets
get
away with it. And a lot of that is the hair and the boobs.
Right.
She figured out how to like use objectification to her advantage.
Yeah.
She really
That's
did.
amazing.
Yeah, it really is amazing.
Yeah.
It's total masterclass.
Wow. The other thing I really admired in the book was how you're able to hold this, like you look at not the dark side of Dolly, I don't know if she's dark side, but you look at, you're critiquing her, like parts of her, like Dollywood, when you go to Dollywood, and you, in a later chapter, you talk about like the very climate unfriendly aspects of Dollywood, and also, you know, her reluctance to label herself a feminist for many years, but you're able to do that while still like lifting up your, keeping your admiration for her. I really loved that.
None of us are perfect, and I mean, yeah, at Dollywood, there's an actual, like one of the attractions is a train that runs on coal. which is like such a move right now. It's a statement. And you know, and she hasn't, it's interesting, the writer Sarah Smart, who's also written about Dolly, said in the Dolly Parton's America interview, she's from a similar region and background as Dolly, and someone asked her if she gets mad that when Dolly won't call herself a feminist, and she says, only the part of me that went to college. You know, like, it was like, she knew, people from that region know her heart. And, you know, it's really about language. Like, she's always acted in very feminist ways, she's just been hesitant to take that label for, you know, for various reasons. You know, sometimes she's made, you know, mistakes. Like, there was this, you know, many years ago, she was supposed to do a TV show that was about like a church. She's going to be like, I don't know, a deacon, or there was some kind of comedy, but it fell apart. And she gave this interview where she was like, you know, I think there's a lot of Jews in Hollywood, and they, you know, and you know, because of that, they felt uncomfortable with a show about a church. And I don't think she thought anything of it, and she probably just believed that to be true. It wasn't malicious, it was just that's what she knew. And of course, you know, there was an outcry, and what she did was apologize. Like, wow, imagine that. She didn't double down, you know. She just said, you know, I'm sorry, I know what it's like to be, you know, pigeonholed for things just because of where I'm from, and like, I apologize if I hurt anyone. And like, I feel like that's how you do that.
Right.
Someone wants to talk Kanye West.
Yeah.
And so like, yeah, I mean, she does do things that I'm uncomfortable with. But the thing about Dolly is that I would say there's a Dolly for everybody, because everybody loves Dolly. Like, the left and the right, like, she's the only thing this country agrees on is Dolly Parton. And for good reason. Because she's somebody who just wants the best for everybody. And she genuinely doesn't categorize people. Like, the rest of us are busy doing that. And she's just like, you're all God's children. And she means it so genuinely. It's, you know, I mean, I've watched enough footage and read enough to know that she really means it.
And there have been times when she has come out and taken a side.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the pandemic sort of left us with like no fucks left to give Dolly. But before that, before like 2020, she was very hesitant to say anything except with queer rights. That was always the hill she was going to die on. I mean, so much of her touring band and the people around her doing the hair and makeup, and you know, were queer in some way, and she was just like without, no matter what kind of backlash she got from any of her fans, that's where, and you know, and I will say too that her unabashed like love of God and religious devotion is something that could also turn people off. Right. You know, especially on the left, perhaps. And that doesn't stop her. So those, I think, are the things that are so, you know, important to her. But there are other things that she's just like wouldn't take a side on. And you know, she was once. It's funny, and this shows how like divided everyone is. She gave this interview where she was asked about Jane Fonda's climate activism, and all she said was, you know, Jane Fonda's they're very close friends since 9 to 5. She's like, you know, I admire Jane for her activism. I do my activism differently in my songs, and that's, you know, you can tell where my heart is by my songs. And so the left was kind of pissy because they were like, you know, you're not supporting Jane. And then the right was like, why were you there supporting Jane Fonda? She actually did neither thing. Right, you know? Right. She was supporting her friend, you know, she was just being She wasn't taking a stand at all, you know, which she's very good at. Yeah. She's sort of a master at that too. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Was there a chapter in here that was like harder than the others to write, or a topic that, like a connection you were drawing that was? The hardest stuff, and there's some tough stuff in here. Yeah. The hardest stuff for me to write was the stuff about my kids. Oh. Okay. Yeah. Like I had, a lot of it I took out. It was a lot more explicit in early drafts, and then I was like, you know what, it's not my story. Yeah. Right, it's their story. So they're still in there, and you know, I say some things, and you know, and I was like, are you sure, with my older daughter who's 17 now, but she was a little younger then, I was like, are you sure this is okay? She read the whole book?
Or-
She could have, but she,
Yeah.
I think, just name searched. She really didn't want to have to read the whole book. Yeah. My young one Stella's only 13, so it's not
Yeah.
appropriate for her.
Right.
And she comes off so well in it because she was so little during the whole time I was writing it. I mean, Ada comes off well too, but I talk about some of her struggles, and she's so Gen Z that she's like,
Yeah.
what's a big deal, Mom?
Right.
Everyone
Yeah, you
struggles
don't
with
care.
mental health. And
Right.
what is this magical generation that just is free to
Right.
talk about stuff? You know, and like I mentioned, you know, she came out as bisexual in 6th grade, and I'm like, are you sure you're comfortable with that? And then she got mad at me. She's like, why wouldn't I?
Why wouldn't I be, right? That's offensive.
Okay. But, you know, but writing about some of the hard stuff and writing about, you know, the relationship between the sisters and all of that, like that was hard for me just because I don't know, I actually don't know why, but it was hard. Every time I wrote about my kids, I cried.
Oh, yeah. One of the things that I found so interesting was the contrast between Dolly's like sexual freedom and then her constant dieting. You know, like the self-denial of
Yeah.
that. That was such an interesting
Right?
chapter, yeah.
I mean, her autobiography, I would say, is like the horniest autobiography of a celebrity I've ever read. Like seriously, she's up for anything and anything. But there is this weird flip side, which is like her culture of like denying her, like she's always on a diet. One of the most horrifying things from watching the book was watching all these talk shows from like, I guess it would be like the late 80s, early 90s when she was at her lowest weight. And she's like, dangerously thin, and
Yeah.
she admits it later. Like she had just gotten sort of hooked on dieting, and she was going on talk shows, and all anyone wanted to talk about was the size of her waist, which was somehow 18 inches, which is like a
gosh.
toddler's waist size. But you know, that's all anybody wanted to talk about and
Yeah.
ask her about. There's this one like hour-long Oprah episode, and this was Oprah was like also in like the midst of her obsession with her body. And it was just these
yeah.
two phenomenally accomplished women talking about diets for almost an hour. And it was so unpleasant, and my younger daughter Stella was in the room with me because at the time she was going to 5th grade on Zoom because it was a pandemic. We have a New York City apartment, we had to double up. I was like, should I not be exposing her to this?
No.
Like I never talk about like diets and like that bodies in that way.
Yeah.
And I'm like, is this dangerous? So then I had to talk to Stella about like what was wrong with
Right.
this way of approach. It was just wild to see what women, how we diminish ourselves like that.
Yeah.
And somebody of like Dolly with such big appetites and like
Yeah.
amazing,
Right.
you know, like amazing lust for life in so many
Yeah.
ways, just, you know. But one of the greatest tidbits in the book is that the song Two Doors Down, was actually, I don't know if you know the song, but it's about a woman who's like just been broken up with, and she's in her room alone, lonely, and then she hears a party 2 doors down. And by the end of the song, she's gone to the party and she's found a new love. So, but it was actually inspired by her love of fried clams. And she was upset because she was at a party and she couldn't eat the fried clams because she was
at a Howard Johnson.
Yeah, she was at a Howard
I mean, it was
Johnson's.
like a dinner group.
Right, I think it was Carl's birthday. I'm not,
Okay.
I could be remembering wrong, her husband's birthday. And they were having fried clams out of a hat. I don't know, they served them in like a plastic hat. We were kosher growing up, this is not something I'm familiar with. But she would have like 4 ounces of beef for dinner and like some, like just like a crazy
Wow.
diet thing. And then she was like, screw it, and she had the fried clams, and that's what Two Doors Down is about. It's about fried
That
clams.
was so interesting.
It's so wild.
Yeah.
And like as a poet, I love that because I love how you can just turn like literally anything into a song or a poem.
Oh my God.
Yeah, that's my
great.
favorite story maybe.
That was a great, such a weird story.
Yeah, it's so
Oh
weird.
my gosh. Does anyone want to chime in with questions? I have one.
Yes, that's not about rainbow, is it?
It is not.
Okay.
The trauma that you dealt with growing up that you've discussed here, when you became a parent, especially to girls, how was that as far as like trying to protect them
Yeah.
from happening to them?
That's a very good question. I think one of the things was that it made me discuss things like consent and you know, how you let people approach your body, even in terms of hugging. Like, you don't just go hug someone, you ask them, can I hug you? You know, and in this way, it seems so kind of absurd, you know, to ask like a 5-year-old to ask someone for a hug, but it's also a habit, and I think that was something I was very conscious of, and I was also always worried that I was going to take, you know, whatever trauma effects I still had and, you know, like pass it down, and, you know, and I do suffer, you know, I've had PTSD and I've had anxiety, and so, and try not to be overly anxious, you know, as, you know, especially as I got older and like leave the house and go do their own thing, and
Yeah.
I think it's terrifying under any circumstance for any parent, but I think I sometimes would overreact in my anxiety about it. But for me, as with everything, I just read a lot about parenting in this circumstance, and like, and that's how I just read. Like, I just need all the information that I can get. I also think that like, it's hard to avoid, you know, probably as anybody in this country, but just especially, you know, as a girl in this country, it's hard to avoid a lot of the things, you know, maybe you avoid the worst of it, hopefully, but you're still getting it every day.
Yeah.
You know, my older daughter was catcalled one time she was 12 years old, walking to school. You know, it's just like, how do you prepare them, you know, to be out in the world? It's like, I don't know, I do my best, but who the hell knows how it's going? It's a crapshoot.
Yeah.
It's a good question.
Yeah.
I have a question about whether or not you saw something that I think I caught it during the years of the pandemic. There's a great video of these 2 young black rappers listening to Jolene
yes.
for the first
Love
time.
them.
That, you know, I
Yeah, it's so beautiful.
and watching them kind of get it
I love
is
that
just
video.
They
a
love Phil
beautiful.
Collins,
Yeah, I know.
too.
It's such a good series. Like these 2 young men who are just
Right.
like listening to music that
From the
we
80s.
that we're so like doesn't feel very
Right.
special to us.
It made
because
it new,
But they
yeah.
were like, you see them like when Jolene really kicks in, they're like, their eyes light up, and it's like, it's amazing. That song is like one of these songs that just everybody loves. Like everybody.
Right.
I mean, Little Nas X did.
Not your husband.
Except for Timothy, yes.
Okay.
Husband is the I actually had a friend, one of my friends, I won't at them, but who was one of my most helpful friends in terms of editing, said to me, you know, I've never really been into Dolly Parton. She said that at the end when the book was in it. And it's funny because she and Timothy probably read the book more than anybody
wow.
else, and neither of them
Did it convert her, the book?
The book didn't convert. It converted Timothy to a lot of the songs, but not Jolene. But
Wow.
everybody else besides my husband
Loves Jolene.
loves Jolene.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a cherished song for a
It
reason. But
is.
to watch, you know, 2 music-loving young men
Right,
discover
from a
it.
completely different culture.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's beautiful. I
Yeah.
love that video. For sure.
Okay.
Google that.
Yeah, totally.
And then the one other, and again, in your research, you probably came across it, but I think it was maybe Radio Lab that did.
Oh,
and
yeah. The
I don't
Dolly
know
Parton's
who-
America. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
And I love that I was left with that image, and you kind of evoked it too. I forgot the guy's name, who the reporter.
Jadam Boomerang.
Okay, yes. He was talking about the fact that Dolly seems to open up like a third space, so that people who have nothing else in common,
Yeah.
you know, can be together.
Yeah, she really is the only thing, like, I say that and it's funny, but I try to think if there's anyone else that I
Right.
can't.
Yeah.
There's some people who come sort of close,
Yeah.
you know, I mean,
Mhm.
everybody loved Mr. Rogers, but he wasn't as big.
Right.
Like
Right.
Betty White, but also not as big.
Mhm.
I
Right.
just can't think of anybody else who does that. It's
Yeah.
really sort of, like, someone made this joke on Twitter, because it's going through all these things with, like, Elon Musk. They're like, Dolly should just take over Twitter. Call it Twitter and like
Twitter.
done with it.
Gosh, yeah,
Which I
that's
would
a
join.
great
But it's true, like she
Mhm.
really is. She does open up this space where you can just be yourself.
Mhm.
And that is really something. As someone who grew, you know, she grew up in poverty, one of 12, and she would sing she would put like a tin can on a broom and sing to her chickens. Like she opens up like space for those weirdos, you know, like all the weirdos who would do it. Like she's there for them. Yeah.
Oh my God, yeah. How do you, oh, sorry, I'll let you. How do you respond to her more religious songs, like the more gospel-y songs?
I love them, and I'm so Jewish, not religious at all, so maybe that helps, but I'm very culturally Jewish, and I grew up very religious, and the New Testament God does seem friendlier than the Old Testament God is like big on vengeance and smiting and jealousy and things, but the absolute joy that she finds in God and religion and the idea of an afterlife and that her loved ones will come back. She truly believes this, which I envy. I've always had envy for deeply religious people because, that's, I want to, I hope that they're correct.
Yeah.
And Dolly makes me believe more than anyone because she's got this song Raven Dove that I listen to all the time and I always cry at the end because
what's it called? Raven
Dove. And it is like unabashedly like super religious, weapons to plowshares, like, he's going to come down from heaven and sweep us all up and take us to the afterlife, and it's beautiful. I'm always crying by the end of it. And I'm still very, very Jewish.
Yeah. Ashley, did you know?
Oh, I was just going to ask, I had a good pleasure of going to see Dolly.
Yes, that's right.
Oh my gosh, Ashley's also in the book.
Yes, this is the in the book.
As I was reading it, I was wondering if you've ever come across any like evidence or any sort of meta discussion Dolly's had on politics. Like, does she ever, do you think, just consciously not want to get in a lane? Like, and I think about something, and I think about this all the time because I remember when the New York Times did a women need to stop saying sorry, and you were like, I can say sorry if I want. And I still do because I say sorry all the time. Like, you can't tell me what I want. Right? And sometimes I feel like that might be like behind Dolly's. Like, don't tell me what to say and how to say it, and I'm just gonna. And there is something really like maybe. And I'm also from Tennessee, so I have to get along with a lot of people I don't necessarily agree with. But there is like I had lunch with my uncle this summer, and it was so interesting because we were both like consciously trying to not talk about those things, but it worked. It was like we love each other. We've been loving each other for a long time, and we like cats, and and there is some kind of something admirable about the way that she's like, you're not gonna get your lane.
Yeah, it's I'm of two minds about it, right?
Yeah.
Because like, how do we change the world into what we want it to be without talking to other people about it? But lately, I feel like why bother? Like I don't think that it's gonna change anything, and so that can be very frustrating. And some people are like, cut off your family. Like I'm good. Certainly Dolly's not going to do that. Dolly's one of 12, so there are many different opinions. She's very conservative members of her family, and then she's got Dolly Parton, who's her younger sister, who's very left. And she purposely has not gotten into politics, I think, because for several reasons. Dolly's always like Dolly's heart and Dolly's wallet. And she's a very shrewd businesswoman, and she's the only person with a giant fan base on both sides of the aisle. She really is, and like she's not going to jeopardize one or the other. And so we don't really know. She wouldn't say who she voted for in the 2016 election, and that was like, if there was going to be a time, that was going to be the time, and she didn't do it. She's never said who she was voting for. People will pin stuff onto her. Like everyone said, oh, she turned down Trump for the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Ha, take it, suck it, Trump. The fact is that she had also turned down other presidents. She's not gonna, she doesn't want to do that. And so, and everybody thinks they know where her heart is. Like, I think I know where her heart is. So does, someone who might be at a Trump rally. Like, she's, it can be both frustrating and impressive, I think. Yeah. But she manages to spread her own gospel of acceptance and love and how we treat people and how, I mean, she's such a philanthropist and how much we give to other people, regardless of like the formal politics of it, she's doing good work that anybody can get behind. You know, like she's, so I think somehow she's also the only person who gets away with not picking a side. She's really a unicorn out there.
Yeah, she is. Now that you've written this whole book about her, do you feel kind of done with her?
Blasphemy.
Did it change your relationship to her at all?
She gives a lot of interviews where she does a lot of canned responses. Those interviews where she's unguarded are like the little prizes, you know? But most of the time she's saying the same thing over and over again. So not having to read like literally every one because she's constantly in the news is kind of nice. I'm okay with that. Not having to listen to, like she came out with that Run Rose Run book, which I read. I'll stop there.
I think I remember you telling me about
Yeah. And the album, which, not her best, but I don't have to dissect the songs. I don't have to, I can just go back to enjoying her in a way that I did before the book. Because really, I was just so steeped in everything Dolly that, it was, there was no time for anything.
It becomes a job almost.
It became a job,
Yeah.
and now it's not. And so
that's
that's really nice. I can listen to her for pleasure.
That's wonderful.
As we all should be doing.
I just wanted to know if you want her to read the book, or if you know
Oh,
she
yeah.
has.
That's a good question.
Has she read it?
I don't think so. She has it.
She has
My
it.
audiobook publisher had me write a note to her,
Uh-huh.
which was one of the scariest things I've ever done in my life.
Yeah.
Just knowing that she might see it, and then I was
Yeah.
like, well, okay, it has to be in a pink pen. So I got a pink pen, and I'm pretty stationary. And then I practiced writing it, and I just my first one was kind of slanted. You know how that happens when you write it.
Yep.
And I wrote her this note, which was basically similar to what I said in the acknowledgments, was that, thank you for giving me the wings to get me through everything. But I did sort of do a few drafts of that. So I knew she has been sent it. I don't know if she has listened to it or read it. She seems a little busy.
She does.
Right? She seems a little busy. She's making a rock and roll record. She's making a movie out of the novel.
Oh, she is?
Yeah.
She's in it?
She's in it as the older country star.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Which I will, of course, see.
Of course.
And we'll see, sometimes movies are better than
That's
that happens. But I don't know, people always ask me if I'd like to meet her, and in this weird, maybe creepy way, I feel like she's my best friend already. I'm well, I've met her.
This is being recorded. Don't forget.
We're best friends, darling. We're just I just feel like we're always in conversation.
Right.
I know it's one-sided. She answers me in her songs, so weird. But I also feel like I don't feel like this, I have to meet her. It's obviously if I did, I also, just to be quite honest, don't think I could handle meeting her. I think
I'm overwhelmed.
I would be overwhelmed. I would
Yeah.
think they don't make enough Xanax for an occasion like that. I just don't know how that would go, and then I'd spend the rest of my life being I said that to Dolly Parton. I need cue cards or something. But of course I wouldn't say no to the
Yeah, of
opportunity.
course, you would have to do it.
Yeah, I have to do it.
Yeah. I guess that was what I meant by that question earlier is, it's so difficult to, when you dig into somebody who's your hero, you can ruin them, right?
Yes.
And it does not seem like.
Oh, yeah. No, that's true. I mean, I've had that with other heroes,
Yeah.
Alice Walker was an early hero of mine, and I still love her so much, but she
Yeah.
said some questionable things. It can just be very disappointing.
Right.
But no, she's still, it's like I said, nobody's perfect. I mean, I have many people I love who are, all the people I love actually are wildly imperfect. And I am wildly imperfect, and so is she, but she in fact surpassed what I think I would have imagined I did deep into a person. Could she have, she's just always forging forges the best path. I don't know like how she does it, but she's just, I mean, like even when you think about her induction to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, she first turned it down because she hadn't made a rock record, but they'd already sent out the ballots, and she was like, fine, I'll do it, but if I get it, I'm gonna make a rock record, and then she's making a rock record. I don't know, like
Who
she
would
just,
do that?
right, she's just
Yeah.
like, she's that person.
Yeah.
She's like the overachiever that you love anyway.
And she kind of dominates that group, Jolene.
Oh,
you
yeah,
know,
I mean, that
so-
she's like, everyone, I love that, because like Rob Halford of Iron Maiden was like, oh my god, I get to sing with Dolly Parton, Judas Priest. Thank you.
Whatever.
That's why Paul's.
Yeah, oh, that's- Paul is
It's like, oh my god,
right.
I get to sing with Dolly Parton, and
Yeah,
like, the look on his face is like totally tickled, you know, it's just, yeah, it's, I love it, and everybody's like, oh my god, I get to sing with Dolly Parton.
Yeah,
And she's there like looking so happy to bring people in, like,
yeah.
that's so Dolly.
Oh, wow. Any other questions?
Yeah.
I understand that Dolly Parton was the inspiration, but ultimately the person who persevered was you. When the Dolly Parton songs weren't playing, what kept you on the path to not fall apart?
Mm.
That is a very good question. I think probably my optimism and just my belief that that I could make it. Like there was something better for me. Like I don't know where it came from. Like I think like I may be lucky, I just had that inside of me. But I just always thought if I just keep going, I'm gonna get to this thing that's better.
Yeah.
And I have always found that like my like little mantra in my head is always the only way out is through. And so it was just always like just go through. And you know, and also there's probably I have a good dose of I'll show them in me. like you'll see.
Very motivating.
Yeah, like I always think about how like definitely when I flunked out of high school I would have been least likely to succeed. But in my head I was like, yeah, I'll show them. And like I don't know, that's how I
Yeah, and that's probably
Get through
part of
everything.
what draws you to Dolly
Yeah.
too, is that you both have that in you, right? You
Oh
see-
yeah, I mean when
Yeah.
she graduated high school, so she was a step ahead of me.
Yeah.
But she at the graduation on Friday night, it was a Friday night, and there weren't a lot of kids in the school. It's a small town. Each kid got to go up and say what they wanted to do with their lives, and most of the boys wanted to be farmers, and the girls were going to get married and have kids. And you know this was 1964. And she got up there and said, I'm moving to Nashville, I'm going to become a country star. And everybody laughed at her.
Yeah.
And the next morning, she got on a Greyhound bus and moved to Nashville. And met her husband that day too.
She met Carl.
She met Carl the day that she moved to Nashville.
She was doing laundry on the
Oh,
day.
right,
she
yeah.
She's Dolly. She didn't have that many clothes was the problem. And I think washing clothes in Pigeon Forge was more of an ordeal than in Nashville, so she just packed her dirty clothes.
Oh,
Like a
my
college kid
God.
coming home.
That is the crazy story too. I love that one. It sounds like myth, like it can't be.
Yeah, it
true.
can't possibly be true, but it is true. And Dolly does self-mythologize, you know, there is that. I've seen her change her story from interview to interview,
Oh,
but
yeah.
that one has stayed consistent.
Yeah,
I mean, I think we all do that to some extent,
Sure,
right? Like,
right.
she just has proof of it because there's a gazillion interviews.
wow. That's amazing.
No question. Maybe this is one I'm not supposed to ask, but so where do you go from here? Are you headed back to poetry, or will you stay in prose for a
I
while?
don't know, I'm taking suggestions.
Okay.
Like, for real, if anyone has a good idea. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't feel like my head is in poetry right now, which is very weird for me. I haven't really written a poem in ages, and I'm thinking probably more nonfiction. I toyed with the idea of fiction, but plot is like very mysterious. Like, what's something that happens? I If anyone knows of something that happens and wants me to try to turn it into a novel. But I don't know, I really, like, it's such a strange place. I've never finished a project and not known what's next. This has never happened to me before. So I feel very, very antsy, which is why I keep saying I'm just gonna learn how to play banjo and be done with writing. Because I just don't know, but lately I have a lot of things floating around in my head, which is a very good sign.
Yeah.
One of the things is that, like, I just sort of want to dive deeper into some of the family history stuff in the book, you know, and just do some more
Your
essays.
own?
My own,
Yeah.
yeah. Like, I'm not going to write about Dolly again,
Yeah, yeah.
unless she asks me to. In which case, of course.
Yeah, you could write a novel like she did with James
Yeah.
Patterson.
If anybody wants me to write about Cyndi Lauper, I'm available to.
Oh, that would be interesting though, so delving into your family history.
Yeah, I think that's something that it's just sort of, one of the things that I thought a lot about in writing this book was intergenerational trauma and Jewish generational trauma in particular, and the culture of secrets that dominates that culture. You know, and it's a survival method.
Yeah.
But I'm curious about that because that was my own internalized culture of secrets, which I think I broke through having written this book, and it feels good. And I'm like, maybe I can look into this more. Like, why do we keep secrets? And a lot of times we do that to protect ourselves and our children.
Yeah.
And
We think we're
protecting them, and like what? And I think that going back to Gen Z, I think that's why they're so open about stuff, because their parents are all like, this secret thing is not working.
Yeah.
We're just going to tell them what's going on in the world. And
Yeah.
so they're also very stressed out, but
But it's all out there.
it's all out there.
Right.
What is your favorite piece of Dolly wisdom or advice?
I'm gonna butcher it, but I do have one. I have two.
Yeah.
One is the way I see it: if you want the rainbow, you gotta put up with the rain. Which is
Yep.
Yeah.
exactly. The other one I'm going to butcher, but it is my favorite, which is that if you know, if you have a dream, you have to. I'm paraphrasing. You have to work at it.
Yeah.
You need to do the work to reach your dream. You can't just sit around because that's a wish, not a dream. And I think that's something that, without having read that, you know, for many years, is what I felt. Like, you have something that you want, you really have to put the work in. And you can dream big, and she's dreamed big, and she's worked for it. It didn't just float over to her, you know,
Right.
and that's, for me, very motivating to think about the difference between dreams and wishes.
Yeah.
She's like a poetic genius, clearly.
That's great. That's great. Any last questions? Yeah, Paul?
What's the worst Dolly album?
Trying to get me more hate now. I would say Rainbow.
Yeah.
Which one is that?
Rainbow is the one that came out in like the mid to late 80s.
Okay.
That's just really, it sounds like it came out, it's overproduced.
Oh, I think
It's-
you write about it,
I
right?
do write
Yeah.
about it. Yeah.
You're not complimentary.
No, it's not, it's just not very good.
Yeah.
I love everything about her, and if that is your favorite Dolly Parton album, I'm so happy I have that. And I'm so glad she made that for you. I'm not going to be putting it on again.
Oh gosh. Thank you so much,
Thank you for
Lynn.
having
It was
me.
great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming, and yes, our next program is Thursday, December 8th. It'll be the last one of the year, and it's with local phenomenal writer Marina Budos, who'll be sharing her latest novel, We Are All We Have, which is a YA novel, and it's about asylum and sanctuary in fiction.
It looks
Right,
good.
you did? Yeah. So, thank you all.
Thank you.